All right, awesome. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here for our talk today. It has been amazing to host so many of you to gather here online, to hear from some amazing experts and change makers. I think this series really started out from a desire to connect with you all and explore all the sectors that interact with our food systems and with our health. So as we're thinking about the many intersection points between our environmental health, agricultural health, and human health, herbalism really comes to mind for me. It's an impactful tool in our growing ecosystems. So today I'm excited to welcome Danièle Fogel, the founder of Yervika, an herbal education project that seeks to foster connection and belonging through herbs, to share her knowledge in the herbalism space and how they can be used in agricultural ecosystems. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, everyone. It's morning where I am. Good to see you all. So I'm going to start sharing screen in a moment, and I will send this presentation out to people afterwards. When I do share screen, however, I am not good at looking at the chat. We will hopefully have time for some Q&A at the end, but if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and know that we'll get to them afterwards. And yeah, if you're able to come on screen, that would be great. And if not, I also understand. All right. All right, let me just get in presentation mode. Give me a moment. All right, can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. All right, so again, I'm so excited to be talking to you today about the role of herbs in growing ecosystems. I've just a little bit about me. I've been in education for almost 20 years. And I am a gardener and an herb enthusiast and herbal educator. And talking about herbs is one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. So I'm really happy to be with you here today. So we're going to start with doing a little bit of an intro to herbalism. There has been a rising popularity in herbs, learning about herbs and in herbalism in the past few years. And so I just wanted to do a little intro to talk about a little bit of background, dispel some myths, and just introduce herbs for the amazing beings that they are. Then we'll talk about the role of herbs in growing ecosystems, including farming ecosystems, garden ecosystems, agricultural systems, and food systems. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to connect with herbs in your everyday life. And again, at the end, we'll have a closing and we'll have some time for Q&A. So first off, yeah, what is herbalism? So herbalism is many, many things. And I think the first thing that comes to mind when I think about herbalism is how ancient it is. Herbalism really dates back to the beginning of humankind. I know that today we can be like, ooh, herbalism, it can kind of be like, this mystical, magical, or kind of like question mark, what is this? But herbalism really dates back to very, very far back. We as humans have used herbs since time immemorial in cooking, in rituals and ceremonies, and for healing purposes on physical levels, emotional levels, and also spiritual levels. Herbs are so ancient that they were found in ancient Persian burial chambers, which is a long time ago. And ancient Egyptian royalty were anointed with herbs when they took the throne. And herbs were really everyone's first system of medicine, no matter where your people come from. Herbs were your first system of medicine. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. So some of the earliest written documents were actually written about the healing properties of herbs, which is quite incredible. The Chinese book of Pensao, which was written around 2800 BCE, was a book on medicinal plants. And the Egyptian Ebers papyrus from ancient Egypt, approximately 3,500 years ago, lists the medicinal uses of plants. So these were some of the earliest written documents, and they were actually about the healing properties of herbs, showing us how ancient this practice with herbs and this relationship between humans and herbs really is. So plants also became the basis for a lot of our pharmaceutical medicines that we use today, right? Like I mentioned, no matter where your people are from, your first system of medicine was herbs, and plants then became the basis for a lot of medicines that we see today. So for example, aspirin was actually developed from willow bark. Salicylin, which is a compound found in the willow tree, is the basis for the salicylic acid, which is actually the pain-relieving compound in aspirin today. So that anti-inflammatory pain-relieving property of aspirin comes from willow bark. And the word salicylic actually is named after the botanical name of the willow tree, which is salix. And this number shocked me when I found out about it. But today, 40% of our common pharmaceutical medicines originate from compounds found in plants, which is a really, really high number. Obviously, there are other things in pharmaceuticals, which is why working with herbal medicine can sometimes be a bit cleaner and lower risk. But 40% of our common pharmaceuticals today originate from compounds found in plants. So what does this mean? This means that as people, we've co-evolved with herbs throughout the centuries. So in this sense, right, herbs really influence our DNA and our cell receptors, as one of my teachers, Serafina Caprano, says. Right? If you think about how we have evolved with herbs throughout the centuries, right? Think about that, the centuries. We've been eating herbs, we've been using herbs for medicine, we've been using herbs spiritually, so many things. This relationship is really lives in our bodies, right? So this connection between human and herbs is really visceral. It's a somatic one. It's an ancient one, and it's one that is actually pretty easy to remember, right? When we start to become conscious of this connection and this ancient practice that all of our peoples used to practice. Now, it's important to talk and to talk about and think about how herbalism has been demonized and minimized throughout the centuries. Various peoples, practice herbalism today in a variety of ways, which is actually really incredible given how much people tried to destroy this knowledge, right? And we saw this come in many forms through the witch burnings in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, right? Women who possessed herbal knowledge were branded as witches and were burned alive. And this was really to secure the supremacy of Christian-centric values. And Ramon Gros-Fogel, a decolonial scholar at UC Berkeley, calls the witch burnings in Europe one of the 4 epistemicides or genocides of the 16th century that really shaped the modern world. And so these epistemicides and genocides, it was about killing people in order to kill knowledge, right? We see herbalism demonized and, attempted to be destroyed through colonization and modernity, right? Colonization began in the 15th century, and it imposed one system of knowledge on another, right? Which was like this scientific, quote unquote, rational, again, Christian-centric thought imposed on other peoples, right? So coming from Europe or the West and being imposed on people in countries that are currently considered part of the global South, right? These places had still thriving herbal medicine practices, and people were really violently punished for practicing their own ways. And we saw this across colonization, right? And this was one of the ways in which herbal knowledge was also attempted to be suppressed, right? This imposition of one knowledge system, one way of knowing over another. And modernity, right, which we still see in practice in place today, really pushed newness forward, right? It was like about rejecting traditional ways and really prioritizing knowledge of the mind over knowledge of the body, right? The rational is better. Intuition is bad. It's quote unquote black magic. It's witch, magic. It's women's hysteria, all these things like that, right? So we see ways in which herbalism was attempted to be suppressed. And that legacy goes on and lives in our current day. right? In 2025, herbalism is really misunderstood. It's seen as pretty suspicious sometimes or not really working, right? It's kind of like, oh, only if you believe in it will it work. Um, this also means that there's not a lot of scientific studies about herbs. Science is starting to catch up with some studies about how, for example, like consider mushrooms, herbs, right? How psychedelics can actually really help with mental health challenges. But generally speaking, most studies about herbs have been done on animals. And so it's like, okay, well, in rats, we saw that this herb interacted in this way, but there's not been a lot of formal scientific studies for better or for worse. But it means that there's no sort of like you go on the internet, you look up a plant, and you'll see a lot of scientific studies that say there's been no proven evidence of this herb being able to help with this, that, or the other. Whereas this is part of indigenous knowledge, this is part of ancient knowledge. People have seen how herbs have helped and supported our physical, our emotional, and our spiritual. And so even today, it's still dismissed as like not being legitimate knowledge. And it's not covered, right, as part of healthcare. So sometimes it's not as accessible because an herbal consultation can cost anywhere from $100 to $200 and is not covered by insurance. And so we see this also through the fact that there's no sort of formal herbalism diploma. You can take herbalism classes and you can go through a program, and at the end they'll give you a certification, but that certification isn't recognized by any sort of like systemic or institutional body. There is in the United States the American Herbalism Guild, and you have to have, train for a certain number of hours, but there's still no formal certification. And at the beginning of talks for about herbalism, you have to declare, I am not a medical doctor. What I'm saying is for educational purposes only. And I know that in France, which is where my mom is from, the herbalism certification was outlawed, or the diploma, sorry, was outlawed in 1947. And so people are still studying herbalism, right? There's something there that this knowledge has survived so many attempts at suppressing it. And there's interest, right? Because there's magic there and there's something that works there and there's something that's incredibly powerful in reconnecting to plants and using plants in this way. But to know that the legacies of how it's been demonized and minimized definitely live on today. And so I want to make a point, right? I want to say that the medical system is beginning to understand the relationship between health and nature. Oakland Children's Hospital, for example, has a Center for Nature and Health where they give nature prescriptions. But there's still no sort of like, imagine if you had a team of practitioners, right? A team like a medical doctor and an herbalist and perhaps like an acupuncturist, some sort of team of medical professionals that, if something wasn't working perhaps in the allopathic medicine field and there's an herb for that, or there's an herb that can support that imagine what it would be like for doctors to talk to herbalists and have that kind of collaborative relationship. I think it could just be really beneficial in a lot of different ways. And a lot of herbalists, I also want to say, don't reject allopathic medicine, don't reject quote unquote modern medicine, right? And for me, I really believe that it's a mix of both that can help us really truly be well. And so herbalism, if I'm thinking about what is herbalism, is also a way of orienting to plants in the natural world, right? Herbalism really invites us into a reciprocal relationship with plants, which is actually really deeply needed today, right? We are in a climate crisis and the climate situation that we have today because of mistreatment of the earth, right? And so herbalism really, it's a practice of being in reciprocal relationship with plants, being in reciprocal relationship with nature, and understanding that if the earth isn't well, I'm not well. right? Which is an indigenous perspective that is still intact in many indigenous cultures today worldwide and was lost along the way for peoples where that's been lost. And so in this sense, herbalism is really important because it definitely invites us into a way of orienting to plants in the natural world that is reciprocal, which is deeply, deeply needed today. And learning about herbalism is also learning about this kind of reciprocal relationship is also, it's a reorientation, right? And it's a remembering of a relationship that has always been there, is still there, and is one that we can go back to and that we urgently need to kind of reframe our relationship with the natural world and the earth in this way. And that's something that herbalism offers. Herbalism is also an ancestral practice, right? And so I talked about how herbalism can be healing in a lot of ways. And that part of that is through helping us reconnect to ancestral practices, ancestral roots. So if we think about herbs, right, and inherent in herbalism is land justice, and thinking about, ways in which people have either been forcibly taken from their ancestral homelands or are currently being forced off of their ancestral homelands, or really, really holding that relationship between people and the earth and land and understanding that relationship. Right. So herbs have cultural roots in the sense that each culture has traditions, right, of using specific herbs in cuisine for health, for healing, right? And so these specific herbs are rooted in place and they're associated with specific geographies, specific climates, and specific peoples. And, you know, Lebanese American herbalist Layla Fogali coined this term that many herbalists use called plantcestors, right? So orienting to plants as our ancestors. And she says the plants are our ancestors, our plantcestors, as I have come to call them. They have adapted to life on this planet for millennia before we even got here. And as we relate to them, they show us how to do the same. And she says, plants native and common to our ancestral lands have a particular affinity to our beings. They remember us, activating roadmaps encoded in our DNA. And I really do believe, and I have experienced myself, that specific plants, right, based on one's ancestry, work differently for different people, right? If our relationship to plants is encoded in our DNA, if our relationship to plants lives in our bodies, then reconnecting with specific plants where our peoples are from can do something really powerful. And I've experienced this really it's very shape shifting, right? And I do believe that certain plants have more potent medicine for certain people based on our ancestral sort of lineages. And so in this sense of herbalism as an ancestral practice, understanding plants as our ancestors, our plantcestors, right, strengthens our connection to lineage and contributes to a greater sense of connection and belonging more generally. Orienting to plants as our ancestors and understanding who our plantcestors are can help to heal disconnection from ancestral lands and can be part of non-material, but still decolonization processes nonetheless. And so this process can be, joyful. It can also be painful if there's been a lot of disconnection from land, especially if it's forced disconnection from land in our lineages. So it's important to kind of go slow in this. But if you're interested in kind of digging in more to this topic, there's a free resource from refugia.world. And I'll send these slides afterwards. This is a slide deck called Rooting Deeper, and it's a card deck that came out of a collaboration between myself and Refugia, which is a Netherlands-based kind of healing organization. They have different circles. You can check them out. But it's a card deck for reconnecting with our plantcestors with kind of different levels of questions that you can do, and it's free to get online. But generally speaking, plants that, just give a short overview, our plantcestors are plants that we feel an affinity for, excuse me, plants that grow near us or in the ecosystem where we grew up, and plants that grow in our ancestral lands or plants used by our ancestors. So you can sort of start thinking about that for yourself. And this card deck has a lot of really great questions to help us kind of reconnect in these ways. And finally, herbalism is the practice of using plants medicinally. Let me just check on my time really quickly. Okay. So when I'm talking about herbs, I'm talking about roots, leaves, trees, berries, flowers, resins, bark, seeds, mushrooms, any plants that people have used medicinally for millennia, right? It's not kind of like I'm going to take this random leaf and put it in some water, but it's like there's history to that, right? And there's a reason why and how people have used these plants medicinally. But so people often ask, like, what do you mean when you're talking about herbs? And so I just wanted to preemptively answer that question, right? Herbs can include all of these plant parts, and herbalism is really about using these plant parts in a medicinal way. And so you can do this through herbal oils. I have this calendula oil here. Calendula is an amazing bright orange flower that for us blooms all year long, amazingly. And you can make it into an herbal oil or a salve. It's incredible for helping your skin heal wounds. And so amazing for diaper rash, all sorts of different things. You can prepare herbs in the form of tinctures, which are alcohol-based, glycerites, which use vegetable glycerin, teas, really simple way of preparing, simple but powerful way of preparing plants and herbs. Infusions, where you typically you put more of the herb and you leave it for 4 to 8 hours to sit in water. Syrups, and so many more types of preparations. But you can do so much with plants and preparing them in different forms for health and healing. And so when we're thinking about using plants medicinally, we're thinking about multiple ways, right? There is kitchen herbalism, which is just a lot of the things that I grew up with that my mom would give me, lemon verbena leaves during my menstrual cycle for, anti-inflammatory properties. This would, I guess, be considered kitchen herbalism. And she's just like, these are just things that people know, right? She doesn't actually consider it herbalism, but in learning, I'm like, that's herbalism, right? But so anything you do in your kitchen with herbs is herbalism, right? So there are so many herbal preparations that can be made in a home kitchen. And generally, right, this type of herbalism addresses health concerns of an individual or a family, or friends and family. When we're talking about clinical herbalism, right, and the practice of using plants medicinally, we're thinking more of herbalism practiced by a clinical herbalist, so someone with formal herbalism training or someone who's apprenticed with an elder or a master herbalist. And typically, I talked about those certain number of hours from training, and they kind of, learn how to do clinical consultations, which are typically 1 to 1.5 hours, and it results in an herbal protocol. Here are the things that you need to do to address your main health concern and kind of support you in your restoring health, wellness, and vitality to your body. And so what's actually really incredible about herbs and human beings having used herbs for medicine for so many years is that herbs have affinities for certain body systems. This is really incredible, right, to think about even. And this is where this ancient relationship between humans and herbs, we really see it at play. We have herbs that have an affinity for our nervous systems, right? So herbs such as skullcap and lemon balm, lemon verbena, and chamomile, right? These plants all really, really support us to nourish and tone and strengthen our nervous system, which is something we need more and more urgently every day right now. Um, Herbs also have an affinity for our digestive system. Certain herbs, any herbs that kind of have a strong smell or taste are typically herbs that are going to help us digest, right? Think about drinking mint tea or chamomile tea in the evening. Those are all because these herbs help us digest, right? Other herbs that have an affinity for our digestive system include fennel, peppermint, chamomile. Chamomile is one that kind of goes across the board and does a lot of things. Um, Herbs that have an affinity for our respiratory system, right? And if we think about COVID as a respiratory illness, you know, we're thinking more fires, right? Mullein, elecampane, and thyme, all herbs that have an affinity for our respiratory system. And, I know this, but every time I say it, it's just incredible, right? To think that plants, right, have just play on certain of our body systems in a really supportive way. Herbs, for example, that have an affinity for our immune system include reishi, really, really powerful herb, echinacea, astragalus, right? And when we're thinking about these herbs and the actions that they have, some of them can be found in pharmaceutical medicines and some can't, right? So for example, if we're thinking about anxiolytics, right? If you're on an anxiety medication, that's a pharmaceutical medication, we have herbs that also can help with anxiety, right? So all the nervous system herbs that I listed are anxiolytics, right? And so have that similar function. But there are some pharmaceuticals that don't have things that herbs can do. So there's a specific herbal action called adaptogen, and adaptogens really they help our body adapt. And so they actually help our bodies become more resilient to stress. And so in this way, they help us avoid getting to burnout, right? If it's something that you're taking every day and you should change your adaptogens every 3 to 4 months. But it can help you kind of regulate stress, and it helps our body basically be more resilient to the detrimental impacts of stress. So adaptogens, there are herbs that are adaptogens. There are no pharmaceutical medications that can do that. So there's some overlap, and there's some ways in which, like I said, herbs, have something to offer that are also very unique. Always done in reverence, of course. So that's just a little introduction to herbs as kind of to herbalism. And I wanted to move in now to talking a bit about herbs' role in growing ecosystems. Claire, how are we doing? Anything in the chat that we need to be aware of? Or
So far, so good. There's been a few links to some other herbal resources, but so far, so good. Thank you.
great, thanks. Okay, so herbs, sometimes people, and I used to actually be one of these people, I would hear about herbs and I was like, I don't really get it, you know? But now in having studied herbalism and herbs, I really understand herbs as central and not as tangential. And I really believe that these, relearning the language of the herbs is actually really a key skill that's needed in our moment and for our future. And so I just wanted to talk about the important role that herbs play in growing ecosystems, including food systems, farming systems, and agricultural systems. And so herbs have a role in food systems. Herbs are some of the oldest plant beings on the planet. What does this mean? It means that they've retained a nutritive value more than other food varieties. So they're so old, kind of similar to heirloom vegetables, like that they've retained so many of their nutrients, their original nutrients, right? Even with the depletion of the nutrients and minerals in our soil. Herbs still obviously grow in these soils, but as plant beings, they have retained some of, retained the minerals and nutrients that they do offer. And they have important nutrients for us as part of our food intake. So if we're thinking about really, really nutritive herbs, nettles, for example, has 4 times as much iron as spinach, right? So you think about quote unquote old practices in Europe of making nettle soup, right? So actually eating nettles, where you're stewing nettles in water for a very long time, right? You're getting these nutrients and minerals that nettles offer, a really, really nutritive herb that we're not getting as much of in our food, right? Oat straw is another one. Red clover is another one, comfrey, linden. And just a note that there have been some people who decide to not ingest comfrey. So just wanted to put that out. The studies were mostly done about comfrey root, but again, they were done on rats, so hard to tell. But I drink comfrey leaves. But so if, in herbs can be made in nutritive infusions, quarter glass for like, your quart jar of hot water, steep for 4 to 8 hours and drink throughout the day. The difference on the days where I do drink nutritive infusions and when I don't, I feel much more nourished, right? And so if we think about the minerals and nutrients that are in our foods, there's also something that's, degraded a bit, and that herbs kind of retain these some nutrients that are really important for our food. I'm not saying that our food is not good for us. There's a lot of food that have different nutrients and minerals, but if we're thinking kind of on a global kind of systems level, herbs play a really important role in our food system in that way because they have retained minerals and nutrients that are really important for our overall health, well-being, and vitality. Herbs also play a really important role in our farming systems. And again, it's kind of like, herbs are secondary, but I would argue that herbs are primary and need to be incorporated in our growing systems, including farms and gardens. So, for example, herbs play a huge role and can play a huge role in companion plants. Um, think about pollinators and attracting pollinators to your garden. There are certain herbs, right, that I plant borage next to tomato plants, for example, because they help to repel tomato pests, right? And so herbs can be used as pest control. A lot of the aromatic herbs, tulsi, any herbs that are really high in volatile oils that smell a lot will help to kind of protect your other plants, right, that are growing. So your vegetables or things like that. Think about calendula, which I mentioned before, really good herb for the skin is a marigold, right? Marigolds repel pests from our plants. So herbs are really important companion plants and can actually also help to enrich the flavor of certain plants, which that's another workshop. um, but herbs are also really important to soil and building soil. And I'll talk about cover crops in a little bit, but herbs can bring certain nutrients to our soil. So like red clover is a nitrogen fixer. Comfrey brings all of the 3 things that you need: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? And so herbs can also be used as compost tea as well. Right, in terms of repelling pests and also strengthening the roots of plants and making sure that they're free of aphids and kind of healthy in these ways. Herbs play a role in building soil. A lot of herbs have really long tap roots and can help to build soil in that way as well. Some herbs can also help to accelerate decomposition. So yarrow leaves and elderberry tree leaves can help to accelerate decomposition. So you can just put a bunch of those in your compost and help to that decomposition process to happen. Most herbs also have beneficial insects, including pollinators. I'm sorry, most herbs have flowers, which attract beneficial insects, including pollinators, right? And so, I mean, so many things go to flowers. Some herbs are flowers, like echinacea and chamomile and um, calendula, but a lot of herbs do flower, right? Oregano flowers, basil flowers, mint, even mint flowers. And so you have a lot, of herbs that eventually in some time they flower, right? Time flowers, and you get all of the bees coming and feeding on them, right? So thinking about that and putting those strategically in your garden where things do need to be pollinated. And herbs also, have sensory and therapeutic virtues for us as humans. When I don't have a farm, but when I'm like walking and I'm brushing past something and I smell it, it's like, kind of calms me down, right? And I remember that interconnection too with nature. One of the herbs that I wanted to spotlight is comfrey. And so over here we have, these are the comfrey flowers. They're part of the borage family, Boraginaceae. And these are comfrey leaves. Comfrey is an incredible companion plant to fruit trees. And so if you think about the permaculture concept of fruit tree guilds, where you're creating a mini ecosystem for your fruit tree to thrive. Um, Comfrey has a really long taproot, so it helps to like it feeds the soil by bringing a lot of nutrients, including nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. A lot of farmers will use comfrey like chop and drop, which I don't love to do, but you can do that because the leaves then become mulch. And so they bring all of the nutrients that comfrey has to your soil, right? Just directly to be absorbed by the soil. It's an incredible fertilizer. So again, just you can do that chop and drop, or you just can have it and let the leaves kind of mulch and decompose and help to fertilize your soil. You can also use comfrey as compost tea with seaweed, have a big kind of bucket of it, make sure you aerate it, and then use that as compost tea to help strengthen the roots of your plants, deter aphids, and also attracting pollinators for when it has flowers. So that's just one example of many of the important role of herbs in farming systems. And so another way you can use herbs in farming systems is to use herbs as cover crops. So again, red clover is a nitrogen fixer. Alfalfa will also fix the soil with nitrogen, accumulates iron, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, is drought resistant, has those really long tap roots, and can improve soil health. And oats also, really nutritive for humans, really nutritive for soil as well. Will bring nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So in thinking about herbs in our farming ecosystems, we think about how herbs can help to bring nutrients to our soil, bring beneficial insects, and also bring health and vitality to your plants as well as the humans who tend to it. And finally, the role of herbs in agricultural systems, right? Again, if thinking about on like a systems level, the extractive economy has really endangered a lot of medicinal herbs, right? A while back, this is echinacea right here. Just people went wild about echinacea. It's a really strong immune booster. It can help with immunity in a lot of different ways. And because of its overuse, right, we need to not be so extractive about things. And so planting herbs, endangered herbs, as can definitely be and is a form of earth stewardship and repair. And so thinking about ways in which we've extracted echinacea, American ginseng is also at risk, partridge berry, black cohosh, a lot of herbs used in traditional Native American herbalism here in the US on Turtle Island are endangered because of the extraction processes of colonization and capitalism and all of this. And so, as earth stewards and caring for the earth, we want to think about how we can begin to repair some of the harm that was done. And if you are cultivating herbs, in the wild, take no more than 10% of the plant population that you're harvesting from. That's best practice. And just it's generally good practice, right, to cultivate herbs you want to use in large quantities. And so this is a way of also contributing to earth stewardship and earth repair and the role of herbs in agricultural systems more generally. And so finally, engaging with herbs in, oh, Claire, did you want to say something about the chat?
I did. We had one
Yes.
question. Are
Yes.
nutrients of nettles reduced by stewing them versus eating them directly? And what is the best way to retain the nutrients?
So nettles will sting you if you just put them in your mouth like here. They're stinging nettles. They have little hairs that actually they can bring blood to the surface of your skin. They lose their stinging properties when they're dried or steeped in water. And so, uh, yeah, typically you'll want to cook your nettles. And sorry, can you repeat the whole of the question?
Like, are the nutrients of the nettles reduced by stewing them or eating them, or what's the best way to retain the nutrients?
Yeah, so um, if you eat them in a stew form, I believe you'll have similar nutrients than if you're infusing them in water. The thing is, water is an amazing menstruum. Water, right? Water, alcohol, glycerol, honey, all these things help to extract the medicinal properties of herbs. And so if you have boiling water, that's like one of the best ways to extract the medicinal properties of herbs. So it's actually very accessible because you can do it in your home for tea. And so steeping nettles in an infusion for 4 to 8 hours and in hot water, and then drinking that will give you the nutrients and minerals, and making it also as a soup, because you have that you boil them in water, and so you'll have the nettles in water. You'll have that water and the actual nettles themselves. So does that answer the question for the person who asked it?
Yes. And we do have one more question. Can you
Mhm.
explain more about the process of an herbal compost tea? I've heard of compost tea with earthworm castings, but not herb only based.
Yes. So I've never done it myself, but I've been at farms where they've done it. So I've seen um, comfrey and seaweed mixed together in sort of like a big water thing that you have to mix because it needs to be aerated. Otherwise, it'll grow bacteria and have stuff that you don't want. But you just let it sit and mix it every so often. And I'm sure that you can get more information online about that as well. But just kind of like you prepare your mix. And then after that, you just kind of add it to your water or pour it on your crops as a way to strengthen the roots of the plants, and just help them get those benefits of the compost. I'm not a farmer though, so yes.
Thank you.
Mhm. But I also know a farmer who used comfrey and nettles. And she would just kind of like put the comfrey and nettles in water, let it sit for however long, mix it every now and again, and then she would just like pour it on her crops. Yeah. Any other questions for the moment? Okay, great. And so I just wanted to briefly talk about how accessible and easy it is to engage with herbs, if this is not a practice for you. Um, I started with growing herbs in my backyard and drying them all over the kitchen, which other people in my house are not super happy about. Now I have an herb dryer. But that's how it started for me. And then I started learning more formally about herbalism, realized I grew up with a lot of practices, not naming them as herbalism, and just was very empowering and changed my life in pretty drastic ways, positive ways. But so my suggestion would be to start growing some. There are a lot of herbs that can be grown indoors. There are herbs that can be grown outdoors in pots, or if you have access to a garden space, either shared or your own, is just to start growing some. Um, uh, Storing and drying herbs is really easy, and there is a somatic remembering that happens when you start to do this. And I actually, in the shop on my website, I have a couple of free resources on storing, and I have one on storing and drying herbs, and I have one on making herbal oils, which is a really easy herbal preparation to start with as well. But storing and drying herbs is really, really easy to do as well. And just start experimenting, right? Find an herb shop near you. I'm based in the Bay Area. There's a lot of herbs accessible here, and sort of classes here and there to take, and just start tasting herbs in tea form and mixing and matching. I will say that there's something chemical that happens with drying the herb and then putting it back in water, right? So extracting the water from it and then putting it back in water. So just if you're starting to experiment, I would suggest drying herbs and then putting them in tea. But Herbal Academy has a lot of blogs, really useful blogs, a lot of videos. And so I would really just encourage you to just start exploring and just start experimenting. It's something that once you kind of reconnect with this ancestral practice, that becomes, yeah, just really empowering, a way to take your agency back, ways that you can start to heal yourself, and those around you. So again, so many herbal types of herbal preparations. Over here is an oil. This is the arnica salve. This is a glycerite, was made with vegetable glycerin and olive leaves. This is just dried herbs made for a tea, syrup. So there's a lot of ways, and you can definitely start experimenting, and Herbal Academy is a good place to start. And really to not underestimate the power that this holds, right? Cultivating this connection with herbs and really coming back into consciousness about it. It really is a remembering, right? It's a relearning. It's something that lives in our bodies, and it can really profoundly shift your experience and your daily life in a lot of ways. So just to not underestimate that. So that just, yeah, that, yay, we do have time for more questions. So that brings me to the end. So I have a herbal education business called Yervika, that's based on Ladino, the Ladino language, which was the language of my grandparents, Sephardic Jews. The language originates from Spain. A longer story we can talk another time about, but Yervika aims to foster connection and belonging through herbs. I have a Substack, which seems to be erased from these slides, but that's okay. This is a QR code to my website. I have online guides. I have a couple of free guides on there, and I have a lot of other guides, just that kind of give an overview of herbs, specific herbs, what they do, how you can use them in gardens, and just a lot of different topics. I do garden consultations if you have a garden and you're interested in planting more herbs. I do that. I also do project consultations. So like I said, I was an educator for a long time, and so I developed curricular materials on herbalism. And I also do one-to-one coaching for I was a classroom teacher and also spent a little time in the academy getting my PhD. And so I do one-to-one coaching for people looking to bring more joy and purpose into their lives, especially people who are perhaps burnt out from the systems that we have. And so through that, we do somatic nature-based activities. We do some herbal learning, and the goal is really to reconnect to nature as a vehicle for reconnecting with yourself. And you can find all that information and more on my website with this QR code, and you can schedule a free consultation if you're interested in that through Calendly. Oh, here we go. Here's all the information. So thank you so much. And I'm excited for our Q&A and to see your faces a little bit more. So let me just stop share.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was really so informative. And I love going from like some of the history, it was just felt very, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions? No, I'm curious to hear a little bit more. I know that there was a section in your presentation that was kind of about the way that herbalism has been, attempted to be eradicated in many cultures, and kind of the process of what that looks like then versus now. I'm curious where in your journey the issue of colonialism came up in your journey with herbalism. Like, was it something that brought you to it? Was it something that came out a little bit later? Or yeah, where did that integrate into your practice?
That's an interesting question. I mean, one is like, to me, herbalism is connected to land. And so that means that it's connected to land justice, right? My people are not from here. Like, I'm based in the Bay Area. My people are not from here. We came through a variety of ways for a variety of reasons, and in doing so are part of the displacement of Indigenous people, right? Like the Ohlone people of the Bay Area are not a federally recognized tribe because the real estate is so valuable here. And that means that they don't get a lot of benefits, and just I mean, it's a struggle even if you are federally recognized. But so to me, it was just kind of always there, right? And also understanding and reconnecting to my own roots, right? Like Sephardic Judaism on one side, Ashkenazi Judaism on the other side. Sephardic Judaism originated from Spain, kicked out in 1492. My family went to Greece and Turkey. On my dad's side, Ashkenazi Jewish from Eastern Europe. And that was kind of of course, not like I pay my She'umi land taxes, Sogorte land trust, which is a way to materially contribute to reparations. And I don't know if decolonization is ever possible, but right, trying to like repair some harms is part of the process. But also reconnecting to my own roots and culture, heritage, all of that. I grew up being very connected to that, but I've throughout this herbalism journey and relearning the language of the herbs, right? Like learning about new herbs that I didn't know were connected to and important within my lineage. Like rue, for example, is a huge has played a huge role in Sephardic herbalism, which I didn't know. And now I have a connection to rue, right? And understanding where it came from, where it grew, how it was used. I use it in my everyday life, right? I planted it in my garden. I, talk about it with people who share, this heritage and background too. And it's been a really powerful process. But yeah, to me, herbs are connected to land, and there's just been a lot of land injustice. And so colonialism, to me, if we're not talking about colonization and the role of that within herbalism spaces, then we're not having a complete conversation.
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I have a quick question
Mhm.
about foraging herbs. I
Mhm.
was just curious if you have like a resource or recommendation. I know each herb has a different stage that it's best used for. Like chamomile, you want the flowers, but I'm sure like nettle, you want the leaves. Like, do you have a resource or recommendation for learning a little bit more about like the stages of when to harvest or what parts of the herb?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Are you based in the Bay Area?
I am. I'm NorCal in
Okay.
Sonoma County.
So there is a book on I think it's new. I'm not sure. Was new to me, but I'm not sure if it's recently published, but on East Bay, it's specific to East Bay, but East Bay Foraging Guide. I don't know the exact title of it, but I can find out and send it to Claire. But that's a really good book. It has kind of all of the native plants and their uses, and like when to, I believe, hopefully it has when to harvest. I would think that it has that in there. Um, let's see. Otherwise, I think I've learned just kind of through listening to podcasts, and there are different the Herbal Highway is been on KPFA for many, many, many years, couple decades actually. It just changed the name of it, but they have an archive with specific herbs. And so you could potentially go into the archive and listen to ones that you're interested in that they could, might suggest some of that. Um, Other podcasts, The Petty Herbalist is another podcast where they talk about specific herbs. It has Asia Dorsey and um, her best friend Karina, I forgot her last name, but you could kind of see if they have specific. I just listened to one, and I can't remember the name of the podcast, of course, but it was on St. John's Wort, and but yeah, you could try to any Google search that you do. If you put herbalist or herbalism in front of whatever you're searching, you'll get results from herbalists. And so if you look up like herbalism, foraging St. John's wort, you'll get more accurate information from herbalists. The Chestnut School of Herbalism also has a lot of free things on their website, like blogs and about specific herbs, and they do talk about like when to harvest what. So
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Of course.
I also have a question. You said, I'm just forgetting a word that you said, like a term, and I want to remember it, but it was something about like the properties that herbs have that conventional medicine don't, not the anxiety one, but the other one,
Adaptogen.
adaptogen.
Yes.
Thank you. I didn't want to forget that.
Yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, everyone needs to be having a nervine, which helps to tone the nervous system, and then that adaptogen on a daily basis. Like with the amount of things that are going on today, the intensity of what's happening in our world, those having one herb of each, I think would be really helpful to us to get through this and show up in the way that we are needed to show up. Yeah.
And so is it that some herbs are adaptogen herbs and like they have that quality or that benefit, I guess.
Action. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so adaptogens include tulsi, also known as holy basil. Ashwagandha is an adaptogen. Fo tea root, which is a Chinese herb, is an adaptogen. What other adaptogens do we have? Reishi is an adaptogen. There are a lot of herbs that are adaptogens, like that have that herbal action. And then
Got it.
herbs that are nervines, like help our nervous system, like skullcap, chamomile, right? And so you can think about like finding these herbs, looking them up, and again, using the word herbalist or herbalism before your search, and getting them either in dry form or tincture form. Tinctures are really easy because you can just kind of drop and keep going. But if
Yeah.
you are, if you have the time and are interested in kind of cultivating that connection, right, getting some in dried form at like a herbal apothecary or something like that, and then making it as tea or engaging with or making your own tincture,
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if nobody else has any questions, I think we'll end it there. Thank you again so much. I feel like I have quite an emerging interest showing up for me now, looking into maybe getting some daily teas or tinctures. So thank you so much for everything. And thank you to everybody who showed up and asked such wonderful questions.
Yeah, yay, that's great to hear. Thanks for having me, Claire, and the Climate Farm School, and thank you to everyone for being here. Yeah, happy to continue the conversation. So.